It's nefarious, man. Like, the brain works in fucked up ways.
The mind is one of the most deceiving, manipulative pieces of equipment, flesh, human bodies on earth. I never have trusted my brain.
All of that weight lives in your head, and you are the decision maker.
Psychology of Entrepreneurship.
Hi, it's Ronsley. If this is your first volume, welcome. This is a weekly series where I go inside the mind of an entrepreneur, artist, athlete, academic to decipher what is the psychology of our decisions. I'm Australian, and I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional custodians throughout Australia and recognize their continuing connection to land, waters, and community. I pay my respects to them and their cultures, and to elders, past, present, and emerging of the land I am standing on today. I extend my respects to the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who listen to this. This week, the psychology of entrepreneurship turns one. So today we are going to focus on the word and the definition of the word entrepreneur.
I love the climb. I truly believe the definition of an entrepreneur is loving the process more than the things you get out of it. I don't like the stuff. I don't want watches. Fuck cars. I don't need planes. I don't need dick. I need the process. I need to buy the jets, period. I truly believe that I will never really fully capitalize on all the money or all the opportunities, because I think I always leave a little bit on the table because I want to keep playing.
That was Gary Vee on the definition of entrepreneurship.
UJ, how would you define an entrepreneur?
Yes, someone who consistently produces value. And I use the word produce very specifically. Produce is essentially what production is. Taking a bunch of shit, putting it together in a package, delivering it in a way that delivers value. It's such that the sum of the parts is less expensive than the whole.
Because here's the deal. I believe that moms are the original entrepreneurs, because if they fail at their job, in most instances, someone dies. Also, think about how they take a bunch of shit and put it together in this package called a child and sends them out into the world to deliver value. But everyone goes about doing the entrepreneurship thing in different ways, with different styles.
My general style is, everybody's got different styles. My general style tends to be, I tend to be a sniper with my decision making. Some people are like machine guns. I have a good friend who's machine gun, right? And great. They should do that because that's what they're good at. They've developed the whole personality around that style. Great. Do that because you're good at that and you've learned how to hone that natural style. I'm just more of a sniper. So for example, a good friend of mine, he'll just take something, just throw so much energy and effort and time into it that he'll figure it out over time. Whereas I tend to be more of a sniper. I tend to look, gather information, understand I have a really good shot, understand I have a headshot, pull the trigger.
Psychology of Entrepreneurship.
Okay, Fred, how would you define entrepreneurship?
I define entrepreneurship as, and I probably never looked up the word, which probably would be a smart idea, but my interpretation of it is to create an entity that didn't exist before and now is brought into existence that becomes eventually self-sustaining. And that's, to me, is the ultimate version of entrepreneurship, is when you can be in the mode of being enterprising, but to create an enterprise, it must be self-sustaining and live by itself. And you can obviously contribute to that and be a part of that, but you're not the enterprise. And my version has always been that if you could remove, if I always think, if I wasn't here, what would happen? I always start from there. If I'm not in this company, what would happen? I'm like, oh, that's what would happen there. Okay, we need to change that process. And because as a founder, you always know the little tweaks and the little where the skeleton keys are, and you know where those routes that you can take that people don't. The unconscious biases that people have, and when you know there's not actually something which is cognitively lateral or requires a leap in thinking you can make because you've done it before, but you need to go and teach other people, or you need to smooth the road. Like how do imagine you're on an adventure and you come through to a chasm, and it's like a giant chasm, just like in that Indiana Jones movie, and you know that the rocks are there, the steps are there, but they're invisible, and you just go and step out to them, and other people, when you're not there, they would just go, oh, okay, we can't cross this, so what are we going to do? So the whole system stops. And I think that's the process to me of entrepreneurship, is smoothing those roads, creating those systems, those processes that happen when you're not there.
Psychology of entrepreneurship.
Hey, Tucker, do you consider yourself to be an entrepreneur?
I mean, yeah, of course. Like, just as a matter of fact, I've definitely started a bunch of businesses. So, I mean, an entrepreneur, I think plainly put, is someone who solves a problem in which a way that other people are willing to pay for it, and they are able to capture some of that money. Like, that's pretty much it. Everything else is just explanation.
I was like red in the face because my body just heard what a dumbass question that was just up front. But you couldn't tell that I was red in the face because my skin doesn't change that color. I wonder what my heart rate was like. Anyway, less about me. In the early days of when the concept of this show was coming together, I was really caught up in the word entrepreneurship. Like, should that even be in the title? So I asked a lot of questions around how others define business and who was an entrepreneur.
At its core, business should be, and generally is, when you are creating value either by giving someone something they want, or solving a problem they have that's valuable enough they're willing to pay you more than the opportunity cost of your time, right? And that's what business is. All an entrepreneur is someone who starts a business from nothing.
Ann Leo, named the generational guru by the Washington Post in an interview at Cornell University, said,
"My definition of an entrepreneur is someone who is creative, who is compassionate, who is a visionary, who sees opportunities and seizes the opportunities, and that is what makes the difference, and then who sticks with it. It takes a lot of persistence and a lot of resilience. You get yourself knocked up a lot. You hit your head against the wall a lot. And you have to have the courage and the vision to go with it, not to stick to the rule book. Change the rule book if you have to. But if you have a vision and you know that it's going to impact the world and it is going to help people in some way by giving them jobs, by giving them opportunities, a new product, and sticking with it, that's what an entrepreneur does.
I've had the opportunity to speak with some pretty incredible entrepreneurs and leaders over the past couple of years, specifically for this show, learning about their journeys and finding out how their brains are wired, in the hope that I could understand mine and in turn give you something to ponder about every week as I get exposed to and expose some very serious topics like isolation, race, history, and even stereotyping.
Psychology of entrepreneurship.
For some families, isolation isn't a new concept. People who were born with primary immune or PI disorders may have been living most of their lives this way, and now they're grappling with watching the rest of the world experience isolation for the first time, and everything that comes with that. One of our Amplified team members, Corinne, has a son that was born with severe combined immunodeficiency, otherwise known as SCID or bubble boy disease. Remember that movie from the 70s with the teenage John Travolta playing a boy who lived his life in an actual bubble? Yeah, that's actually a true story based on a boy with this disorder. Corinne's family lived in complete isolation for the first 3 months of Jude's life while they were waiting for him to have a life-saving bone marrow transplant. A common cold could have killed him, as he had no functioning white blood cells to fight off germs or infection. Every single day was filled with overwhelming fear while trying to keep it together for their older son, Shane, who was 7 at the time. After 3 months of living at Lurie's Children's Hospital and the local Ronald McDonald House in Chicago while Jude received chemotherapy and a stem cell transplant, they were again in isolation for an entire year as his new immune system grew and developed. Going through isolation again a second time, this time along with the entire world, has brought up all sorts of triggering memories and instances of PTSD for Corinne and her family. And you know what? She's not the only one. Families of the immunocompromised all over the world are dealing with these issues while not being able to find the supplies they need to keep their homes clean, or being terrified of going to the store for groceries and possibly bringing the virus home. All while reading daily posts on social media about the virus being a hoax or a political issue used to damage the reputation and image of other leaders. It's not just PI families that are experiencing a different kind of fear in isolation. Domestic violence is a terrifying issue the world is always contending with. And for those in unsafe situations at home, isolation can be a matter of life or death. In Chicago, police saw an almost 10% increase in domestic violence calls just for the week of March 16 to 22 alone.
Psychology of entrepreneurship.
So, the reason for this whole volume was for you to understand that there are layers and underlying causes to everything. Perspective is the difference of asking a question from ignorance as opposed to an educated one. In the Constitution of America, there is an amendment called the 13th Amendment. Watch 13 on Netflix for more on that, but here is the amendment. It has 2 sections. Section 1. Neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for crime whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction. Section 2. Congress shall have the power to enforce this article by appropriate legislation. That's a lot of jargon, but Koss explains this better.
So there was a slave owner, all the slave owners were white, all the slaves were black, before slavery was abolished. And so all the black people picked all the cotton, worked on the fields. Now all the slaves are free. Who's picking up the cotton? The slave owner's not used to picking up their own cotton. They're not going to go out there and pay anybody to do it. So they created the 13th Amendment. The 13th Amendment states the only way you could become a slave is if you're incarcerated to death. And so if you lock up people, that you have them work back in the fields. And so who are the people that they locked up? Black people, people of color. So they brought them back to the fields, and it became a systemic thing that's happening today.
Psychology of entrepreneurship.
Mark Yerika Paulson, thank you for being here. I am extremely blessed to be talking with you. There has got to be an element of stereotyping in the work that you do. Is there?
The dynamic that people of color face, or not just people of color, but people for whom there is this build-up of stereotypical, those people do that. Those people, they're like this. So you end up carrying around the psychology of asking yourself an internal question: were they just being rude, or were they being racist? Or were they being rude or just sexist? Or were they being rude or just seeing my social class and looking down on me? I don't know if I had told you this story, but it's the reality of when you walk into an airline lounge, and people may remember that we used to go to the airport and used to go to the airport lounges, but when you walk in there, and as a brown-skinned person, I have to consciously think that I need to make sure that the way I present myself in an airport lounge I cannot afford to be disheveled and kind of rough shaven and daggy clothes. The difference that gets cast that I carry around from my own psychological point of view and the data that I process around me is that a disheveled looking white person, white male, same age as me, walks into an airport lounge and they go, they're an artist, or maybe they're a rock star or a film director, or maybe they're they're something like that. They're clearly an edgy kind of creative type. I walk in there disheveled and it's like, excuse me, sir, I don't think this is where you need to be. You need to be out there, Forget the fact that I've got gold membership.
Psychology of entrepreneurship.
The main objective of this audio project is to bring together entrepreneurs and creatives who share similar values so that they can find the courage to put out their authentic voice for the right people to hear, which allows for them to make their impact on the world. Every great movement started with a memorable speech. For access to full-length interviews, go to psychologyoфentrepreneurship.com and click the button.
I initially started the psychology of entrepreneurship with the purpose of diving into the truth behind imposter syndrome. Somehow, the more I had conversations around imposter syndrome, the more I realized that we as human beings can use any title and definition for good and for bad. And this is also all based on the psychology of confirmation bias, which we have covered a lot on the show. But I'm relieved to know that other people in positions similar to myself are fighting the same kind of battles, especially in their heads. They are also having the same internal conversations as most of us with their own internal dialogues.
Melissa has an amazing TED Talk. Yes, this was done at TEDx Monash University, but it has been uploaded to the TED website and is now not a TEDx talk anymore, but a TED Talk. The topic, how your inner critic is holding you back. And that voice, well,
I personally think that there's only one voice, and you can call it your ego or your inner critic or your inner mean girl or your inner bad boy or negative Nancy, whatever voice you want to give it, right? And I think it's really important to give it a voice, which is what I talk about in my TED Talk. I take them through the cast process. And the first step of the cast process is C, creating a character. C stands for character. So you've got to give that voice a little character. And you can call it Bob, Mary, whatever you want. And I personally believe that there's this one voice, this one negative inner critic voice, but that voice has different disguises. So that voice might sound different and wear different clothes and, show up in different ways, but it's still the same negative voice, right? And I think that is a lot less confusing for people, because if they think there's multiple voices, they get overwhelmed. They're like, yeah, but this voice is saying this, and then this voice is saying this, and it's just one negative, limiting, fear-based voice, your ego. That's it. And so that's the first step is in the cast process is you've got to create this character. There is schools of thoughts that are like, you've got to kill the ego. And then there's some that are like, you got to make friends with it. So I personally believe we don't need to kill the ego. The ego is a part of us. And that voice is there it thinks it's helping you. It truly does think it's helping you, but it's not. And your job is to be discerning between its characters, like the characters that it plays, because that voice is also the voice that says, do not get in that car with that guy. Do not do that. This is a bad idea, Melissa, or do not walk down that alley. That is also the same voice, like that voice can also be super helpful. And so I feel like we really do have to create this character.
Psychology of entrepreneurship.
Now I wanted to get into some of Laura's teachings. So for someone that has studied what goes on inside the brain of anyone at whatever capacity, what were the things that were like a given? Stuff that everyone who studies Psychology 101 would know. Stuff that everyone knows as gospel on which other psychology ideas are built on. So I wanted to know, what did we not know that anyone in the field of psychology would know as default?
So one thing that's huge that I see all the time, especially when I start debating politics with my father, is something called confirmation bias. And so I think understanding something like confirmation bias can really help you if you're dealing with clients, or if you're just analyzing your own behavior, or if you're having a discussion with somebody. So confirmation bias is we humans, all of us, not the left, not the right, not the females or the male, everybody, we tend to look for information that confirms what we already believe. This is proven with science. So my father is very conservative politically, and so if we watch the exact same news conference, he will say,
"Did you see how XYZ reinforces what I already believe?"
And I myself am independent. I don't like either side, but I'm very much not extreme right. So I'll say, but what about ABC? I saw those things that reinforce my belief. And so we can literally have the exact same experience and take it completely different ways. And that's because of confirmation bias. So I think knowing that can really help you understand yourself better and your tendencies, and it can also help you communicate better with people. So that's one thing that studying psychology can help you in real life or in business.
Psychology of entrepreneurship.
Philip McKernan from Volume 1, when I told him that I felt like I was misunderstood while I was growing up every time I spoke, that my voice wasn't heard, and if it was kind of taken out of context. To that, he said, "Isn't that funny how you've built a whole business ecosystem on helping people find their voice?" So the podcast itself has become more about diving into the entrepreneurial mental game and how my guests have overcome a variety of different obstacles, including their careers to get to where they are today. Each guest has given us a wealth of knowledge. Well, as I say, that is actually not a wealth of knowledge. It is a wealth of wisdom behind each of their highs and lows of being an entrepreneur. I bet you have very different way to think about an entrepreneur and what an entrepreneur does. I do too.
I also wanted to know who the early adopters of the entrepreneurship lifestyle were. What drove people to sign their own paycheck?
I think there's a tendency toward entrepreneurs to be folks who have not necessarily succeeded in traditional paths. So lots of folks who are real high IQ but didn't do great in school, or couldn't sit still, or just didn't like it. Or folks who did well in, or who had high achieving, jobs at Google or whatever, but found them to be too constricting, or didn't like how much they had to work. They wanted more freedom. So they're tinkerers. They're people who are unsatisfied with the variables in their lives, and so they're looking to change the variables or change the path.
Is a founder different from an entrepreneur?
I think of the founder as somebody who made the thing, right? Somebody who started the company. But I think there's some nuance in the sense that a lot of entrepreneurs I know also buy companies. So, maybe founder implies like you're there day one, putting the bricks together on the first day. But an entrepreneur can sort of come about that role in a couple of different ways.
So if that's an entrepreneur, what are the topics that they don't generally talk about, or what are the topics that we don't generally talk about? There is definitely a paradox between wanting to sign your own paychecks and living in this unknown for extended periods of time, for me at least. But how does that play out?
I think as humans, we all go through a series of moments in our lives or phases of our life where we're oriented, we have it all together, we feel really cohesive, and then flow, calm, centered, on top of it. And then we inevitably sort of shift back over into like angst and disorientation and like what's next or some sort of painful crisis. There's an ebb and flow to everyone's mental, emotional life. I think that is amplified with entrepreneurs because the relationship with the business sort of adds this extra pull toward whatever the business is doing. So there's the human and then there's the business, and they're growing and they're failing and they're growing and they're failing, and the two are somewhat intertwined. It's an extension of the self. I mean, there's no doubt about that. I think people can sort of say, oh, I don't feel like that about my business, but like on a neurological level, you do.
Here is one powerful entrepreneur with some amazing advice.
The moment you can figure out what it is you're supposed to be doing, the sooner you are able to get about the business of doing that.
The way through the challenge is to get still and ask yourself, what is the next right move? Not think about, oh, I got all of this stuff. What is the next right move? And then from that space, make the next right move and the next right move. And not to be overwhelmed by it because you know your life is bigger than that one moment. You know you're not defined by what somebody says is a failure for you, because failure is just there to point you in a different direction.
I've learned to appreciate living in the moment, and I ask that you do too. I'm asking this graduating class, those of you here, I've asked all of my viewers in America and across the world to do this one thing. Keep a grateful journal. Every night, list 5 things that happened this day, in days to come, that you are grateful for. What it will begin to do is to change your perspective of your day and your life.
That was Oprah Winfrey for those who didn't recognize her voice. But entrepreneurs, do they build businesses? Do they solve meaningful problems? Do they bring people together? Do they, make things happen?
Think about what has had to happen or come together for you to just be born, leave alone be in the position you are right now to listen to this podcast. So, one of my weaknesses within Hal Saver's framework is journaling. I haven't been consistent in implementing a regular journal, and I know lots of people in similar situations. So I wonder if Hal had any advice for that.
Here's what I found at the end of my first year journaling. But the week between Christmas and New Year's, I went back and read all of my entries. And while I did that, I had another notebook open and I wrote down on one side lessons, accomplishments, and commitments. That was it. So I would read and I would be like, oh yeah, I totally learned this thing, right? And I would write it in the lessons. And then I would go, oh yeah, I forgot that I accomplished, I did that, right? And because you're reading the journal, you're reading things like, man, I'm working hard on writing The Miracle Morning. I hope people like this. What if nobody bought, right? And then you realize, oh my gosh, I finished it. So there's an accomplishment. Here's the point. By doing what I call that an annual journal review, right? Nothing fancy, but most of us end the year with heightened gap focus. We end the year and go, man, there's so much more I wanted to do. I did not reach all of my goals. I'm not where I want to be. And we end the year often feeling like a failure, feeling like we could have, would have, should have done so much more, but we didn't. And right. And what happened when my first journal review and having those pages of lessons, accomplishments, and then commitments for the next year is I went, dude, I killed it last year. But I would not have known that. I literally would not have known that unless I had gone through 365 journal entries right? And written down, and I think I had a list of, it was like 20, I don't remember exactly, but like 26 accomplishments or something. You know, I'm like, I gave my first paid speech. I wrote my first book. I doubled my best year. Like, I did all these things. And so that, to me, that's exactly how I do it. It's by looking back over my journal. And now I don't wait until the end of the year. In fact, interestingly enough, this morning I did a journal review. So I started doing the free writing 2 months ago. This morning I went back and I read every single journal entry. And then I made a list of lessons, accomplishments, and commitments, right? I literally did this morning. So that's it, man. And it's profound in terms of what it does for your self-esteem. And, you know, I mean, it's so encouraging, but also just for your clarity. You're like, wow, I learned so much, I accomplished so much, and now I have clear commitments to implement these lessons and follow up on these accomplishments so that moving forward, I extract all the value from these journal entries and I accomplish and achieve and feel even better.
Psychology of entrepreneurship.
Coming up on the Psychology of Entrepreneurship.
The leading cause of death amongst Aboriginal people between the age of 15 and 35 is suicide. I'm the first generation on my mother's side that wasn't forcibly removed. That's how recent our history is in this country. It wasn't 200 years ago. Well, the basic stuff is we need to acknowledge that this country was invaded instead of referring to our history in this country as settlement. It's just sugarcoating things to make white Australians feel good about their own history in this country.
Psychology of entrepreneurship.
I'd like to use this part of the volume to thank everyone that plays a part in making the Psychology of Entrepreneurship what it is today. Thank you to my team for always making sure the parts to this machine are running smoothly week in, week out, and to constantly make sure that I'm always refining my voice. Thank you to my incredible guests that I've interviewed. Each one of you have blown me away, and I'm so honored that you gave me the time to let me pick your brains about what entrepreneurship has looked like. And thank you for your constant support and love. We feel it, we appreciate it, and we can't wait to make more content for you. Thank you.
Psychology of entrepreneurship.
This is a Must Amplify production. Special thanks to every guest expert that has appeared on the show. Editing, voiceovers, and sound design by Kaylee Bunnyman and Tiago Vega. Guest research and content by Claire Gould and Corinne Castles. Project managed by Kaylee Bunnyman. Produced and hosted by me, Ronsley Vaz. For more episodes and where to listen, go to mustamplify.com/POE.
Hey, it's Kaylee from Must Amplify. I'm the sound engineer for this volume of Psychology of Entrepreneurship. I'm part of the team that made this production come alive. I work as a part of a global team with our studios based in West End, Brisbane, Australia. If you would like a podcasting checklist, email me at kaylee@amplifyagency.media. That's KAILI@amplifyagency.media. We specialize in finding your voice and making sure it's heard by the right people. If you are considering whether a podcast is a good idea for your business, check out our other show on shouldistartapodcast.com.